Well, hello again, YouTube. We're off on another rabbit chase here. Chase a rabbit down a hole. I don't know if I want to call it a rabbit. It's more of a rat. Disgusting rat. We're gonna sniff him out, dig that hole out, and we're gonna get to the bottom of it. Conspiracy theory. Term gets thrown around a lot. It's a negative, derogatory term applied to anyone who thinks that, you know, there may be some group of people behind the scenes pulling strings in certain situations where we get a narrative and we're supposed to follow that narrative and we're not supposed to think anything like this. We're not supposed to think that there's people pulling strings behind the scenes. But we know there are. It's undeniable. It's been that way for a long time. In fact, it's been that way all throughout history. Certain guys behind the scenes pulling strings, both good and both bad. Uh, Here we're going off our last video where we were talking about the Nazis and fascism and groupthink and how that all works. And that nice mess that our world leaders got us into. What are they leading us to? What is the final goal? War? Because if that's the goal, hey, they did a good job. They're still doing a good job. Fact. Money, riches, wealth, fame, power. Is that their goal? Because they've achieved that too. So what other goal is there to go to? They can't get enough money. They can't get enough power. You can give them all the money in the world and all the power in the world, and they'd still want more. So the first thing we're going to talk about here is a little operation that was conducted after the end of World War II called Operation Paperclip. I guess some highly intelligent, wise individual within our government system or group of individuals decided that it would be a good idea after World War II to bring a lot of the Nazi war criminals over here to the United States. In fact, according to this article, about 1,600 of them. Uh, we had left the Soviet Union untouched after World War II. In fact, during World War II, we through the Lend-Lease program, we gave them lots of assistance. If it wasn't for us, they likely would have been crushed by the Nazis. They didn't have, in the early stages of the war, they didn't have the means to keep up with the demand for the weapons that they needed in order to conduct their war against the Nazis. Stalin got a big surprise. We talked about that in our last video. He didn't want to believe that the Nazis had or so we're told he didn't want to believe that the Nazis had a plan to attack Germany. I don't understand how a man like that powerful, and I'm using this term loosely, intelligent, would have suspected that the Nazis had plans to invade the country. And they did, and it supposedly surprised Stalin. And anyway, the reason I'm telling you that is because the justification for this program was basically the idea that, well, after we defeated the Nazis, the Soviet Union became our biggest enemy, despite the fact that we supplied them with weapons throughout the whole entire war. Almost as if it should have been set up that way. That was the goal. They had to keep two opposing forces in order to keep the war machine rolling, the military-industrial complex, which Dwight D. Eisenhower warned us about at the end of the war. You can look that up. Just Google Or go to YouTube and type in Eisenhower's speech on the military-industrial complex. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Ike gave a speech about that, and Kennedy gave a speech about talking about stuff like that as well. You can Google that as well. I'm sure that'll come up. But yeah, so Operation Paperclip. And I'm just going to read here from the Wikipedia article. So Operation Paperclip was a secret United States intelligence program in which more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians were taken from former Nazi Germany to the U.S. for government employment. Not only would we pay these war criminals, but we're giving them basically the freedoms of the United States. One of the most well-known Nazi scientists that came over here is a man by the name of Wernher von Braun. He was the one that designed the rockets that took us to the moon. The Nazis employed him to create their V-2 rockets and other weapons to attack Britain with. The first, well, not necessarily the first, but some of the earliest missiles that were intercontinental missiles that were used in warfare. They launched thousands of them at Britain. They indiscriminately landed in all kinds of places. And the guy was a war criminal. He killed innocent people. His weapons, his designs, he killed lots of innocent people. And we brought him over here and we employed him. And he created the rockets that we put our nuclear warheads on, that we could aim at the Soviet Union. And those rockets are the same rockets that provided the basis for the rockets that took us to the moon. But yeah. So at the end of World War II in Europe, between 1945 and 1959, several were confirmed to be former members of the Nazi Party, including the SS and the SA. The SS, those were some bad boys there. They were the hardcore of the Nazi military. The SA was the political wing. They were basically the stormtroopers of the political party in the early days. These were some evil, vile, disgusting individuals with bad philosophy, bad intentions for the world. But we brought them over here to employ them, to give them jobs, give them security, and to live in freedom, despite the fact that they took freedom from so many people. So, Operation Paperclip, the effort began in earnest. Yeah, right. In 1945, as the Allies advanced into Germany and discovered a wealth of scientific talent and advanced research that had contributed to Germany's wartime technical advancements. And remember, as we're reading these articles, keep in mind that Edward Bernays, a lot of these articles are written with the same kind of public relations intent that he had developed back in his day. So you got to take all this with a grain of salt. They go really lightly on these articles. The U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff officially established Operation Overcast and Paperclip were related. And the terms were often used interchangeably. On July 20th, 1945, with dual aims of levering German expertise for the ongoing war effort against Japan and to bolster the U.S. post-war military research, the operation conducted by the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency was largely actioned by special agents of the U.S. Army's Counterintelligence Corps. Many selected scientists were involved in the Nazi rocket program. And here we go. We're going right back to Wernher von Braun, who I told you about. Rocket Man. Aviation and chemical and biological warfare. The Soviet Union in the following year conducted a similar program called Operation Osavakim that emphasized many of the same fields of research. So, two opposing forces, both working on rockets, aviation, and chemical and biological warfare, as well as I don't know that we involved the ex-Nazis in our nuclear program because ours was more advanced than theirs was already, so we didn't really need them for that. But the Soviet Union was definitely working on a nuclear program, and it wasn't much longer after 1945 that they eventually developed their own nuclear weapons and started stockpiling them. And we still are feeling the repercussions of that today. The Soviets, so far as I know, have the largest cache of nuclear weapons in the world, followed by the United States. And then there are several countries underneath them that also have nuclear capabilities, including China and India, Pakistan, Israel. Israel's nuclear program was actually covered up for quite a long time. There was a guy named Mordecai Vanunu. He went around exposing the Israeli nuclear program, and as a result, he spent many years in prison for disclosing that information. Guy is a hero. Anyway, back to Operation Paperclip here. The operation, characterized by the recruitment of German specialists and their families, relocated more than 1,500 experts to the United States, has been valued at US $10 billion in patents and industrial processes. So they made a lot of money off these Germans. A lot of money off these Germans. And to adjust that for inflation today, that'd be even a lot higher of a percentage. Recruits included such notable. Ain't nothing noble about them. Notable figures as Werner von Braun, who I told you about. Now they cut off his head. Poor Werner. A leading rocket technology scientist. And again, I explained to you what he did. Those recruited were instrumental in the development of the U.S. space program, which I told you about, and military technology during the Cold War. Despite its contributions to American scientific advances, Operation Paperclip has been controversial because of the Nazi affiliations of many of the recruits and the ethics of assimilating individuals associated with war crimes into American society. And here we're getting some of that public relations stuff going on, where they're talking about they assimilated the Nazis. No. The Nazis assimilated them. The operation was not solely focused on rocketry. Efforts were directed towards synthetic fuels, medicine, and other fields of research. Notable advances in aeronautics fostered rocket and spaceflight technologies pivotal in the space race. The operation played a crucial role in the establishment of NASA and the success of the Apollo missions to the moon. Operation Paperclip was part of the broader strategy of the U.S. to harness German scientific talent in the face of emerging Cold War tensions and ensuring the expertise did not fall into the hands of the Soviet Union or other nations. The operation's legacy remained controversial in subsequent decades. We're going to stop there on the article because that pretty much provides the basis for it. But here, as you can see, the main thing that they're pointing out here is what would seem to be mostly benign aspects of this program, which is the rocket programs and NASA's flight and the Apollo missions. But again, like I said, those rockets, they were originally designed to deliver nuclear warheads. They weren't designed to go to the moon. There's lots of stuff going on with rockets today. There's almost a rocket launch just about every day in the world somewhere, whether it's China or Japan or America or Europe. Africa doesn't have much of a rocket program going on in any of their countries, but Africa has been under the yoke of the I'll just call it what it is, the New World Order for quite a long time, and they are not allowed to have that kind of technology. And this goes back to eugenics. Africans, as we all know, especially here in the United States, people of African ancestry and Africans themselves have always been looked down on and cast as less than humans. And they're under the yoke of the whole entire world. There are a lot of people in Asia who hold that sentiment, who believe that they're somehow the best race. There are people in Europe who believe that. There are people in America that believe that. There are people in South America. Uh, and so as a result, like I said, there are only a few nations that have this technology available, and this technology was originally designed. Even Werner von Braun himself, the father of rocketry, I guess you might say, his original intentions when he got into rocketry was to go to outer space and explore outer space. And the disgusting men of his time took him and employed him and made him make weapons as opposed to what he really wanted to do. And after they got done with him, the Americans took him and made him make more weapons. And then he eventually got to what he wanted to do, and they achieved the Apollo mission of the moon under John F. Kennedy. So yeah, but again, like I said, they touch on the more benign aspects here, but they don't really get into the deeper stuff, which is the chemical and biological warfare and the aviation stuff that was going on. Chemical and biological warfare, we're going to get into that later on. But for now, I just want to establish the fact that there was a concerted effort by the United States government to bring Nazi war criminals to the United States to harness their intelligence in order to give us a somewhat of an advantage in the Cold War. But when you make a deal with the devil, you pay the piper. And as a result, unfortunately for us Americans, we ended up with a government who, in my opinion, these days is just as bad, if not worse, than the Nazis. And the people behind it are evil. They are evil incarnate. Bad, bad boys. So, yeah, Nazis coming to America. Quite a thing. But that whole rabbit hole goes a lot deeper. There was a lot of support for the Nazis before the war. After we declared war on Nazi Germany, those people kind of fell back and like hushed that stuff up for a while, but there's no doubt in my mind that they still held those same sentiments. And obviously there were people in our government to have that sentiment, otherwise this operation would not have existed. So now we're going to go into another, and this is conspiracy fact, people. This isn't conspiracy theory. These are things that are verified, and there is documentation, and we know that they happen. So Operation Northwoods, or Operation Gladio, is the next one we're going to talk about. This is I'll read it here. Operation Gladio was the code name for clandestine stay-behind operations of armed resistance that was organized by Western Union and subsequently by NATO, formed in 1949, and the CIA, and by the CIA established in 1947 in collaboration with several European intelligence agencies during the Cold War. Although Gladio specifically refers to the Italian branch of the NATO stay-behind organizations, Operation Gladio is used as an informal name for all of them. Stay-behind operations were prepared in many NATO member countries and in some neutral countries. Gladio, the word Gladio, in its association with Italy, might ring a few bells. So we had, in the old days, we didn't have, the Romans had. Let me make that clear. Well, I guess we do kind of have gladiators these days. They don't really fight to the death most of the time. But we definitely, it's what we call MMA, UFC, pride fighting, all that kind of stuff. That's basically the Colosseum, the Roman Colosseum. And they're basically our modern day gladiators. So gladio can refer to gladiator. It also refers to the gladius, which is the the sword that was carried by the Roman legions. It was their stabbing sword. It was sort of a short sword, maybe a little over 2 feet long. It was protruded out between the shields when they would march forward, and they would use it to stab their opponents in the stomach as they trampled over them. It wasn't held above the head like you would imagine most, medieval swords were. It was held low by the side at the hip and used in a stabbing motion while they hid behind their shields. It was quite effective. They conquered the whole world. Well, pretty much most of the known world at the time with those swords and those methods. So yeah, just a little word study on the word Gladio there. Operation Gladio is used in an informal name for all of them. Stay-behind operations were prepared in many NATO countries and in some neutral countries. The idea being that if the communists invaded these sleeper cells, that's a word that got thrown around a lot back after 9/11. The terrorist sleeper cells in the United. They wanted everybody scared. They wanted to keep people scared, and that's the psychological operation. Part of the psychological operation that's associated with that kind of stuff. Keep the people scared. If you can keep them scared, you can keep them relying on you. And if you can keep them relying on you, it doesn't matter what you do, they need you to protect them, and they can't protect themselves, which unfortunately here in America we never did. We had the Second Amendment. Even to this day, we still have our Second Amendment, thank the Lord. And even if we didn't have our military, no one would be able to invade this country. There's just too many guns out there. They wouldn't last very long if they tried. According to several Western European researchers, the operation involved the use of assassination, psychological warfare, and false flag operations to delegitimize left-wing practices, parties in Western Europe countries, and even went so far as to support anti-communist militias and right-wing terrorism as they tortured communists and assassinated them, such as Eduardo Mondlane. In 1969, the United States Department of State rejected the view that they supported terrorists and maintains that the operation served only to resist a potential invasion of Western Europe countries by the Soviet Union. So they insist that that's what it was used for. The fact of the matter is it was probably used against many people, not just communists. With that kind of apparatus and that kind of power, why would you not employ it to any means necessary to achieve your goal? So what we're talking about here is a hidden underground connection of different intelligence agencies from NATO countries, including the United States, all working together to further a mutual agenda. That agenda supposedly being the preservation of capitalism and freedom and democracy, but you really have to have a lot of faith in these people in order to believe the things that they're telling you after everything that we've shown you, after everything that I've shown you. And I say we because I'm not the only one talking about this stuff and saying this kind of stuff. There have been people like me out there for quite a long time trying to get this stuff out there, and nobody wants to listen. Nobody wants to listen. They're too wrapped up in their fantasy realm. They're too wrapped up in their daily lives of trying to maintain their life. And that's part of the psychological manipulation of these people. If they're more concerned with working and trying to provide for their families and stuff like that, they don't have time to look into this kind of stuff. When they get off of work, they want to relax, so they want to turn on the football game or a TV program or listen to some music, and they don't want to take the time to do the research to figure out why they're stuck in this ever-revolving cycle of warfare and death and destruction and manipulation. So yeah, Operation Gladio. It's one to look into further, maybe. Expand your horizons. And now we're going to get into, and this here, so far as I know, was just an American operation by the CIA called Operation Northwoods. And this is conspiracy fact, people. This is not conspiracy theory. This is conspiracy fact. So, Operation Northwoods was a proposed false flag operation which originated within the Department of Defense of the U.S. government in 1962. The proposals called for Central Intelligence Agency, CIA operatives to both stage and commit acts of terrorism against U.S. military and civilian targets. CIA operatives to both stage and commit acts of terrorism against U.S. military and civilian targets, blame them on the Cuban government, and use them to justify a war against Cuba. The possibilities detailed in the document include the remote control of civilian aircraft. The remote control of civilian aircraft, which would be secretly repainted as U.S. Air Force planes, a fabricated shoot-down of the U.S. Air Force fighter aircraft off the coast of Cuba, possible assassination of Cuban immigrants, sinking boats of Cuban refugees on the high seas, exploding a U.S. ship, and orchestrating terrorism in the United States. The proposals were rejected by U.S. President John F. Kennedy. The proposals were rejected by U.S. President John F. Kennedy. Could you imagine you're the president, and a representative of the CIA comes to you and says, "Hey, we got this plan. Cuba's been a problem for a while. We're going to stage false flag attacks against American citizens and against the U.S. military, and we'll use that just like the Nazis used the invasion by Polish troops at the beginning of World War II in order to justify our invasion and destruction of Cuba, which, so far as I know, that's on the menu again. That is 100% on the menu again. We just got done taking Maduro down there in Argentina, and now we're focusing on Cuba. In the Western Hemisphere, you know, I believe in the philosophy that we should, as America, control the Western Hemisphere. Communism is a threat, and it needs to be dealt with in the Western Hemisphere for sure. I don't know that there's any other communist nations out there in the Western Hemisphere other than Cuba right now, but Trump's got his eye on Cuba. Going back into Fidel Castro, and this gets all into the Bay of Pigs, and this may be one of the reasons that this man right here, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, was assassinated on Elm Street in Houston, Texas. This could be one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, that he was killed. Because with the CIA coming to him to propose these things, he knew and had full knowledge of the fact that these people were not Americans in any way, shape, or form, but that they had other intentions. I don't know where the idea that in order for me to justify attacking another country, I need to kill my own citizens. It's like at that point in time, you become just as big an enemy towards the U.S. as the communists themselves, if not worse, because you're actually in a position, you CIA actually are in the position of supposedly protecting these people, and that's not what you're doing. That is not what you're doing. Dangerous people. Fidel Castro had taken power in Cuba in 1959 and began allowing communists into the Cuban government, nationalizing U.S. businesses and improving relations with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Castro kicked out a lot of the casinos back before the communists took over in Cuba. Cuba was a resort destination. You would go to Cuba and, you know, frolic around in the Caribbean Sea and do a bunch of gambling and whatever else comes along with that kind of stuff that's associated with that kind of stuff. All you got to do is look at Las Vegas to know basically what Cuba was like. Only it wasn't out in the desert. It was a tropical oasis. So they had a pretty good thing going on in there in Cuba until Fidel Castro and his group came in and started changing things, and that hurt a lot of people. The operation proposed creating public support for a war against Cuba by blaming the Cuban government for terrorist attacks that would be perpetrated by the U.S. government. That's what you call false flags. A lot of people think this Operation Northwoods was the outline for the attacks on September 11th, and that whole mess that we got into and are still into over there. This operation, and again, we're talking about, deep CIA intelligence, black ops. We're talking about people like George Herbert Walker Bush. He was running around in these days doing a lot of this stuff and had full knowledge of a lot of this stuff that was going on, including Operation Northwoods. And it just seems funny that this whole thing about the remote controlled airplanes, and you start connecting dots, and maybe you're connecting things that aren't actually connected, but nonetheless, because we have the history here, we know that there's a possibility that this is exactly what happened on September 11th, and the justification for all this stuff going on. And as we all know, who was president during September 11th? George W. And so, George W. wasn't any kind of stranger to this kind of stuff. His daddy was, he was the man when it came to this kind of stuff. The desired resultant from the execution of this plan would be to place the United States in the apparent position of suffering defensible grievances from a rash and irresponsible government of Cuba, and to develop an international image of a Cuban threat to place in the Western Hemisphere. Several other proposals were included within Operation Northwoods, including real or simulated actions against various U.S. military and civilian targets. The operation recommended developing a communist Cuban terror campaign in the Miami area and other Florida cities, and even Washington, which involved the bombing of civilian targets. And think about that. Our own government bombing civilian targets, killing American people. All these people involved, they deserve the highest degree of military justice for being traitors against the United States. And that includes George Herbert Walker Bush, which was to be blamed on the Cuban government to paint a false flag image of Fidel Castro and misinform the American public. False flag events, real, true false flag events planned, and we don't know if they've even been executed or not in some places. During that time anyway. There are lots of things that happened after Kennedy was assassinated, that you could probably apply this to. But again, without an actual paper trail and proof. And these guys have become masters of cover-ups. We'll get into that later. They've become masters of cover-ups. So in order to actually link them to this kind of stuff is going to be nearly impossible. The plan was drafted by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, signed by Chairman. And again, what we're talking about here are traitors to the United States. All these people deserve to be drugged before a tribunal and held to the highest standards of military justice. The plan was drafted by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, signed by Chairman Lyman Lemitzer, and sent to the Secretary of Defense. Although part of the U.S. government's anti-communist Cuban project, Operation Northwoods was never officially accepted. It was authorized by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but then rejected by President Kennedy. None of the false flag operations became active under the auspices of Operation Northwoods proposals. So, be clear about that. It was authorized by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but then rejected by President Kennedy. It had been okayed on so many levels, it made it all the way up to the president, and they were trying to get the president in on that, and he said, no way. I'm here to protect these people. I'm not here to kill them. I'm not a traitor to my country. President Kennedy was a World War II veteran. He served on PT 109. There's lots of documentation on that. It's quite a story. He's got quite a story. in World War II. None of the false flag operations became active under the auspices of Operation Northwood's proposal. So what they're telling you there in that sentence is they may have done other stuff under different operation names, but none of the stuff was done under Operation Northwoods. Nonetheless, all the stuff that they came up with and the ideas that they came up with may have been just transferred over to a different kind of operation. And you can call me a conspiracy theorist, but I think that's exactly what happened. They took the plans from Operation Northwoods, transformed them, and it became this unknown. We don't know about it. It's an unknown operation, which resulted in the 9/11 attacks. Not just the 9/11 attacks, but it also resulted in the I think that was the original bombing of the World Trade Centers, which was originally supposed to bring those buildings down, but they stood. They drove a giant truck. This is the same thing that happened down in Oklahoma at the Oklahoma City bombing. They drove a giant rental truck filled with a bomb into the parking garage underneath the World Trade Center, and they exploded it and tried to bring the buildings down. The war that we saw in 2000, 2001, all that stuff was supposed to happen many years earlier. Their plans got set back because those buildings didn't fall down. A lot of the young people today, even people who went through the war because that war lasted for so long, they might not even know that the World Trade Centers were bombed before September 11th by terrorists. But yeah, we're not going to go any more into this. That's just another thing for you to. There's the traitor himself. Look at that. They call that fruit salad. Look at that fruit salad. Doesn't get more better than that. 4-star general. He's got the NATO flag behind him and some other flag behind him. Who is this guy? He was in charge of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The chairman is the highest ranking and most senior military officer in the United States Armed Forces and the principal military advisor. This guy okayed this stuff. This guy is a traitor. He lived out his whole entire life and was protected. This guy should have been drugged before a military tribunal and held to the highest standards of military justice. And for being a traitor against the United States of America. That's what that guy is. Traitor. So again, we're going to move on from here. I just wanted to touch on that to let you people know exactly what you're dealing with here. And the kind of people who come up with this stuff. And to know, again, that these people are not looking out for you. They will bomb you, and they will blame it on other people, and they will hide behind the scenes, and you will never know that they even existed if it wasn't for people like me. But yeah, there's a rabbit hole for you to go down. Operation Northwoods. Now we're going to get into some other stuff that is conspiracy fact, and that includes MK Ultra, CIA mind control program. This is from Encyclopedia Britannica. And we're going to go on. We're only going to read a small section here because I do not want to get my video taken down because of copyright infringement. So after I read this, I'm going to go over to the Wikipedia article. But I just wanted to touch on this because when I originally Googled MK Ultra, normally when you Google something like that, or you Google people or events, the first thing they're going to offer you is a Wikipedia article. But when I Googled MK Ultra, Wikipedia didn't show up for like 20 results, but Encyclopedia Britannica did. So I figured, you know what, I'll go to Encyclopedia Britannica. I had to go into Wikipedia and look up MK Ultra for it to show up as a result from Wikipedia. But MK Ultra was an illegal mind control research program that the United States Central Intelligence Agency operated between 1953 and 1964. CIA conducted experiments using high doses of LSD and other drugs, hypnosis, electroshock, and sensory deprivation on subjects who often had no idea that they were part of a covert test. Experimenting on human beings, on American citizens. And this isn't nothing new in America. This doesn't necessarily have to be associated with Nazis coming in here and giving our military bad ideas. And I can refer you to the Tuskegee experiments. That's another one you can look up. That was going on before this. Um, Another terrible experiment. Put your trust in doctors and scientists. Do that. Put your trust in science and doctors and see what you get. See what you get. I'll show you what you get. You just wait. You just keep watching this video. I'll show you what you get. Trust in science and doctors. The ultimate goal was to find a way to erase the memory and then control the mind as a tool in fighting the Cold War. In his book, Prisoner in Chief, Sidney Gottlieb and the CIA Search for Mind Control, author and journalist Stephen Kinzer called the program essentially a continuation of work that began in Japanese and Nazi concentration camps. There you go. In part because Nazi doctors and others who had worked in the environments were recruited to continue their research as part of the program. Fearing discovery, the CIA destroyed most records of the experiments in 1973, but details of the program later emerged through congressional and journalistic investigations. Congress had to do a investigation into it because the word was out. If they didn't do it, then they themselves would look bad and the trust in them would be lost. I don't trust them. The only reason they did it is because they had to, for face value, for the American people. Independent journalists, that's where it really came from. Independent journalists. And we're going to leave off Britannica for now because like I said, I don't want to get any kind of copyright problems going on there. So here's the Wikipedia article that I looked up for MK Ultra. And MK Ultra was an illegal human experimentation program designed and undertaken by the United States Central Intelligence Agency to develop procedures and identify drugs that could be used in altering human behavior. Oftentimes, you can get these drugs prescribed to you from your psych doctors. Remember how we were talking about Sigmund Freud and how he was a drug peddler? He was peddling at the time cocaine. And these days, they peddle all kinds of psychotropic drugs that they've been working on for many, many years. But nonetheless, they're still drug peddlers. They don't have the ability to fix the vast majority of the people that go to them for help. The psychologists, they just don't have the ability. And so as a result, they 90% of the time, if not more, they're going to prescribe you something. And I know this because they've tried prescribing them to me. And I said, "No, I don't want your dope. Get it out of here. I'd rather live a real, true human experience than be sedated." The term MK Ultra is a CIA cryptonym. MK is an arbitrary prefix standing for the Office of Technical Service, and Ultra is an arbitrary word for out of the dictionary used to name this project. The program has been widely condemned as a violation of individual rights. Absolutely. An example of CIA's abuse of power. Absolutely. With critics highlighting its disregard for consent and its corrosive impact on democratic principles. Absolutely. Because again, the CIA doesn't work for the American people. The CIA works for the deep state. If they worked for the American people, they wouldn't be setting up plans to bomb and to kill and to experiment on them. They don't work for you. They don't care about you. The CIA is not the only organization in America that is dedicated to that cause. Project MK Ultra began in 1953 and was halted in 1973. MK Ultra used numerous methods to manipulate its subjects' mental states and brain functions, such as the covert administration of high doses of psychoactive drugs, especially LSD and other chemicals, without the subject's consent. Additionally, the methods beyond chemical compounds were used, including electroshock, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, and other forms of torture. Listen to that. If there were anybody in the United States worthy of being drug up onto a a place where you hang people. I can't remember what they're called. But these people are definitely worthy of that. 100% traitors to the United States. Traitors. They are traitors of the United States. They deserve to be held accountable. MK Ultra was preceded by Project Artichoke. It was organized through the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence and coordinated with the United States Army Biological Warfare Laboratories. The program engaged in illegal activities, including the use of U.S. and Canadian citizens as unwitting test subjects. So yeah, there you go. Not just the U.S., but and again, this goes back to Operation Gladio, where these intelligence agencies are working together. Apparently, the Canadian intelligence agencies decided that, hey, we're going to be evil sons of guns too. Come on in, and we can have a party over here too. Have the party in the north and in the south. And that's what they did. Canadian citizens and U.S. citizens as unwitting test subjects. And these are the people who, remember that book we were reading yesterday? That book in our last video about, Sigmund Freud? Using U.S. and Canadian citizens as unwitting test subjects. MK Ultra's scope was broad, with activities carried out under the guise of research at more than 80 institutions, aside from the military. Oh yeah, that's right. That's what I was thinking about. Unwitting test subjects. So that in that book we were reading about Sigmund Freud yesterday, where they can slap a label on you, throw you in an institution, and once you're in that institution, unfortunately for these people, some of them might have been there worthily, some might not have been there unworthily. Might have been in there unworthily, but nonetheless, they were subject to these tests unknowingly. They can disappear you into these places, and then they can unleash these kind of things on you. It's dangerous. It's very dangerous. To confront these people, you can bring them no less than war. You completely eliminate them and annihilate them. It's the only thing you can do, because they're not going to go willingly. They are not going to go willingly. And they have more control over our society today than they ever had before. MK Ultra's scope was broad, with activities carried out under the guise of research at more than 80 institutions, aside from the military, including colleges and universities, hospitals, prisons, pharmaceutical companies. CIA operated using front organizations, although some of the top officials at these institutions were aware of the CIA's involvement. And this goes back to the front. We were talking about that in our first video. The Newsom World Order. The front. That's what they need to put that out there, to hide behind the scenes. And going back to, and again, carried out under the guise of research at more than 80 institutions aside from the military, including colleges and universities. University. Now we're going to go back to this guy. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Theodore John Kaczynski, also known as the Unabomber, was an American mathematician and domestic terrorist. Yeah, he was a domestic terrorist. We know, Ted, you killed some innocent people, buddy, and it's sad that you did that, and you deserve to go to prison for that. But at the end of the day, what you did was no less of a domestic terrorist threat than what we just discovered in Operation Northwoods. In fact, you're small time compared to those guys, buddy. And I know what your intentions were. Your intentions were to get back at those people. And Unabomber. So anyway, Unabomber means, Una is short for university. He was the university bomber. That's what they just shortened it to Unabomber. And he abandoned his academic career in 1969 to pursue a reclusive, primitive lifestyle and lone wolf terrorism campaign. Kaczynski murdered 3 people and injured 23 others between 1978 and 1995 in a nationwide mail bombing campaign against people he believed to be advancing modern technology and the destruction of the natural environment. He cared about nature so much that he was willing to kill for it. He authored a roughly 35,000 word manifesto and social critique, Industrial Society and Its Future, which opposes all forms of technology, rejects leftism and fascism, advocates cultural primitivism, and ultimately suggests violent revolution. I don't agree with a lot of the stuff he said, but he had his reasons for believing that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying his means were correct, but he was coming from a real place of real concern for the state of the world and the state of the people in the world. Kaczynski moved to a remote cabin without electricity or running water near Lincoln, Montana, where he lived as a recluse while learning survival skills to become self-sufficient. After witnessing the destruction of the wilderness surrounding his cabin, he concluded that living in nature was becoming impossible and resolved to fight industrialization and its destruction of nature through terrorism. In 1979, Kaczynski became the subject of what was, by the time of his arrest in 1996, the longest and most expensive investigation in the history of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The FBI used the case identifier Unabomb, University and Airline bombing, before his identification was known, resulting in the media naming of him the Unabomber. So we're going to skip over this part about childhood and high school, and we're going to get into Harvard University, one of our most celebrated scholastic institutions in the land. And we're going to find a connection here with something we just talked about called MK Ultra. So Kaczynski matriculated at Harvard College as a mathematics prodigy. During his first year at the university, Kaczynski lived at 8 Prescott Street, which was intended to provide a small, intimate living space for the youngest, most precious incoming students. For the following 3 years, he lived at Eliot House. His housemates and other students at Harvard described Kaczynski as a very intelligent but socially reserved person. He earned his Bachelor's of Arts degree in mathematics from Harvard in 1962, finishing with a GPA of 3.12. And I don't know much about GPAs, but as far as I can remember, 3.12 is pretty high. Psychological study, this is the part here. And they ain't gonna, because it's Harvard, and because we're talking about public relations, and we're going back to Edward Bernays again, this article here is sterilized from any kind of association with the MK Ultra mind experiments. But as we know, we just read in the article that universities definitely participated in that, and Harvard was definitely one of them. Psychological study. In his second year at Harvard, Kaczynski participated in a study led by Harvard psychologist Henry Murray. Subjects were told that they would debate personal philosophy with a fellow student and were asked to write essays detailing their personal beliefs and aspirations. The essays were given to an anonymous individual who would confront and belittle the subject in what Murray himself called vehement, sweeping, and personally abusive attacks, using the content of the essays as ammunition. Kaczynski spent 200 hours as a part of the study. 200 hours as a part of the study. Imagine sitting there and being abused for 200 hours straight. What kind of psychological effect that's going to have on you, especially if you're already a psychologically eccentric type person. You're pulling on wires and pulling on strings that you don't know what you're going to pull out. Kaczynski's lawyers later attributed his hostility towards mind control techniques to his participation in Murray's study. Kaczynski stated he resented Murray and his co-workers primarily because of the invasion of privacy he perceived as a result of their experiments. So here they do like a double talk thing going on here. Kaczynski stated he resented Murray and his co-workers, but down here it says, nevertheless, he said he was quite confident that his experiences with Professor Murray had no significant effect on the course of his life. So, in other words, did he have plans of doing all this bombing and this reclusive activity before they did the experiments or not? I don't know. Like, I would like to see exactly where this quote comes from, if he actually said this. It seems like something that's been injected in here because it just doesn't make sense with the storyline. And so again, my assumption is, and there was a movie made about him too that goes a little bit more into this, and there's all kinds of other information out there you might want to look up. But yeah, I think it went a little bit deeper. Kaczynski himself might not even have known, based on what we read about MK Ultra, that he had been subject to experimentation with chemical mind-altering substances while he was going through that kind of abuse. Nevertheless, that psychological abuse that they inflicted on people, that's not the only thing they do. We read in that MK Ultra article that sexual abuse and all kinds of electroshock, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse. There's the verbal abuse we just talked about. Ted Kaczynski experiencing while he was at Harvard under that psychological program, and other forms of torture. That's a broad statement right there. And other forms of torture. Like, I don't even want to know what that could possibly consist of. But yeah, I just wanted to give a rundown of this guy here because they paint him out to be the lone wolf terrorist. And why? He understood that the technology that we use today, a lot of it, and we know about this because they track us on the internet, they track us on our phones, they track us on everything. He understood what that apparatus was being built for, and it was being built for control and enslavement, specifically of the mind. And he knew what was up. He definitely knew what was up. You can go in yourself if you want to do some more research on him. I'm not going to get into what all happened to him. I will say he ended up dying in prison. But again, being in prison, he was probably subject to, because I'll tell you what, right now, if they were doing that stuff in universities and psychological institutions, you can guarantee you that they were doing it in prisons. In fact, this brings to mind another thing that I just realized too. There was an experiment that was conducted in prisons on prisoners. I can't remember where it was or what it had to do with, but it was similar to the Tuskegee experiments. And so far as I know, they were offering these guys, I think these guys willfully engaged in these programs, and they engaged in them because they were promised a shorter sentence on their time. And they were experimenting on them with, supposedly it was supposed to be medications, but we don't know what they were giving those guys. So yeah, Ted Kaczynski. I just wanted to bring him up because he is probably the most well-known victim of MK Ultra. Even though most people don't know he was a victim of MK Ultra, he 100% was a victim of MK Ultra mind control. And it drove him to the point where this guy wasn't nuts. This guy was not crazy. This guy was a highly intelligent, highly motivated individual. Eccentric, yes. Crazy, no. Murderer of innocent people, unfortunately, yes. He deserved to be in prison for that. But he didn't deserve what they did to him. So now we're going to get into, now that we've established a lot more of the CIA's dastardly dealings in the United States and why they're worthy of prosecution to the highest levels of military justice. Uh, Next, we're going to get into, let's see here. So, okay, I'm going to play the beginning of this documentary here. I'm only going to play the first few minutes of it. I'm going to leave a link in the description below. If you want to watch the whole thing, I suggest you do. See exactly what we're dealing with here. And yeah, I'm going to play the beginning of this documentary here, and you can access it yourself later on. But this has to do with CIA mind control. And yeah, I'm going to let it rip.
Good evening. It's worth remembering that the Cold War had its price. The economies of both superpowers were skewed towards arms spending, and the world is still feeling the after effects. But individuals too paid a price. In the race for arms superiority, chemical weapons were used on unsuspecting human guinea pigs. In the United States, not only did the Army conduct these experiments, they also filmed them. Tonight, we show that uncensored film for the very first time, despite the Pentagon's attempts to withdraw it. It's an exclusive look at how the US Army targeted its own people long before the enemy could. It's the story of a bad trip to Edgewood.
I've served twice in Vietnam. I have never had anything that was so terrifying as that experience with the LSD. Never. I thought I was going crazy. But I didn't know what crazy was. It was that bad. I couldn't define crazy, but I knew that whatever this was, it was horrible.
"90 miles north of Washington, D.C., stands Edgewood Arsenal, Maryland. From World War I to the present day, it has been the center of the US Army's research into chemical warfare. Within its laboratories, bizarre experiments took place. By giving a cat LSD, Edgewood Arsenal's scientists could turn nature upside down.
What kind of creep does that to a cat? All you cat lovers out there with your cat beads and cat pictures.
Animals were always tested before humans.
Puppies.
Army scientists wanted to learn about the dose levels of nerve agents and chemical compounds. What
Look
would
at the sadness in that monkey's eyes. Look at it.
In an attack.
It's like
And
he's
how their
saying,
troops
why?
could defend themselves
Why?
under attack.
How could you do that? These people are disgusting.
Goats were used as guinea pigs to test the efficiency of gas masks in a chemical explosion.
Just following orders.
But experiments were not confined to animals.
That gas mask worked.
James Ketchum, a retired Army psychiatrist. At Edgewood, his job was to ensure that the bright young soldiers recruited from Army bases across America were fit to be medical volunteers.
We're going to stop right there. Army psychologist. We already discussed psychology, so we don't need to elaborate on that any more than we already have. But yeah, that's the CIA for you. Good old CIA of A. And so next we're going to go into another part where the government has overstepped its authority, and that's going to include. We'll start off here with Ruby Ridge standoff. Ruby Ridge. So the Ruby Ridge standoff was the siege of a cabin occupied by the Weaver family in Boundary, Colorado, County, Idaho. In August 1992, on August 21st, deputies of the United States Marshal Service came to arrest Randy Weaver under a bench warrant for his failure to appear on federal firearms charges after he was given the wrong court date. The charges stem from Weaver's sale of a sawed-off shotgun to an undercover federal informant who had induced him to modify the firearm below the legal barrel length. So he had a shotgun that was too short. That's all he did. He had a shotgun that was too short. During a surveillance operation, Officer Art Roderick shot Weaver's dog when it ran at them. They do that these days. Cops shoot dogs all the time. Not just cops. Any of the government's henchmen will do that. They don't care about animals. They don't care about people. Why would they care about animals? They shot Weaver's dog when it ran at them and then pointed his rifle at Weaver's 14-year-old son, Samuel, who was armed. They lived out in the boonies. And they knew that there were problems out there in the boonies. Not only with wild animals, but even worse than wild animals, wild humans. When they pointed the gun at him, Samuel fired back at the marshals. It was shot in the back, killed by the 14-year-old boy. They kill his dog. He gets mad. Wants to kill them. And they kill him. In the ensuing exchange of fire, Weaver's friend, Kevin Harris, shot and killed Deputy Marshal William Francis Deegan Jr. Weaver. Harris and his members of Weaver's intimate family then refused to surrender. The hostage rescue team of the Federal Bureau of Investigation became involved. The good old FBI, who should have been investigating these people who were pulling this stunt that created this whole situation, instead came to the aid of the people who created the situation. Became involved as the siege was mounted in the standoff. FBI sniper Lon Horiuchi shot Weaver, then shot Harris, but the second shot also hit and killed Weaver's wife, Vicky. The conflict was ultimately resolved by civilian negotiators, including veteran activist Bo Gritz, who eventually convinced them to surrender. Harris surrendered and was arrested on August 30th. Weaver and his 3 daughters surrendered the next day. One of his daughters was a little baby, and so far as I remember, Vicky Weaver was actually holding the baby. When she was killed. That and this here, the Waco siege, also known as the Waco Massacre, the siege by the U.S. federal government and Texas state law enforcement officials of the compound belonging to the religious cult known as the Branch Davidians. Between February 28th and April 19th, 1993, you can see how close these incidents happened, about a year apart. The Branch Davidians, led by David Koresh, were headquartered at Mount Carmel Center Ranch in unincorporated McLean County, Texas, 13 miles northeast of Waco. Suspecting the group of stockpiling illegal weapons, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms obtained a search warrant for the compound and arrest warrants for Koresh and several of the group's members. They had been running a smear campaign against David Koresh before all this was going on, too. And again, this gets into the public relations and the propaganda aspect of psychological warfare on the American people. So they accused him of sleeping with underage girls. And he had, so far as I know, I think he had a couple wives. I don't know that they were actually married. But so far as I know, in my research, that smear campaign against him was unfounded. And everything that he did was legal under Texas state law. As far as him and his wife were concerned. Or his wife. I don't remember the exact details of it. That's something you might want to look up yourself. But as far as I know, everything that he did was legal. The ATF had planned a sudden daylight raid of the ranch in order to serve these warrants. Any advantage of surprise was lost when a local reporter who had been tipped off about the raid asked for directions from a U.S. Postal Service mail carrier who was coincidentally Koresh's brother-in-law. Thus, the group's members were fully armed and prepared. Upon the ATF initiating the raid, an intense gunfight erupted, resulting in the deaths of 4 ATF agents and 6 Branch Davidians. Following the ATF entering the property and its failure to execute the search warrant, a siege was initiated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, during which negotiations between the parties attempted to reach compromise. After 51 days, on April 19, 1993, the FBI launched a CS gas attack in an attempt to force the Branch Davidians out of the compound's building. Shortly thereafter, the Mount Carmel Center became engulfed in flames. The fire and the reaction to the final attack within the group resulted in the deaths of 76 Branch Davidians, including 20 to 28 children and Koresh. They gassed and murdered 20 to 28 children. That's the FBI. The ATF did that. The events of the siege and the attack, particularly the origin of the fire, are disputed by various sources. Department of Justice reports from October 1993 and July 2000 concluded that although incendiary CS gas canisters were used by the FBI, the Branch Davidians had started the fire, citing evidence from audio surveillance recordings of a very specific discussion between Koresh and others about pouring more fuel on piles of hay as the fire started. And from aerial footage showing at least 3 simultaneous ignition points at different locations in the building complex, the FBI contends that none of their agents fired any live rounds on the day of the fire. Critics contend that live rounds were indeed fired by law enforcement and suggests that a combination of gunshots and flammable CS was the true cause of the fire. The Ruby Ridge standoff and the Waco siege were cited by Timothy McVeigh as the main reason for his and Terry Nichols' plan to execute the Oklahoma City bombing exactly 2 years later, on April 19, 1995, as well as the modern-day American militia movement. And yeah, the reason that I'm bringing this up is because I just want to inform you that the things that the CIA did and are still doing to this day, to a certain extent, are not confined just to them. That same agenda that they push is run by the ATF, and it's run by the FBI. And we have new groups that have been made since 9/11, like the Department of Homeland Security. If you really want to secure the homeland, I suggest you go after the CIA. If you really want to secure the homeland, I suggest you look into the FBI. Mr. Department of Homeland Security, Tom Ridge was their original leader. He was the governor of Pennsylvania there for a while. But yeah, he was their original leader of the Department of Homeland Security. You don't hear much about them these days. You hear a lot more about ICE than you do Department of Homeland Security, which you would think these criminal illegal aliens would fall under their jurisdiction and not this new created institution we call ICE. But yet we have, again, the Department of Homeland Security and ICE have been created since then. So you add that on top of the FBI, the CIA, the ATF, and you're dealing with a, well, I'll say exactly what it is. What just came into my mind. It's an occupying military force not dedicated to the preservation of the freedoms and the rights of the American citizens. They're pushing an agenda. They're 100% pushing an agenda, and they're using their power to do that. But yeah, Ruby Ridge and Waco were both supposedly the motivation for Timothy McVeigh for conducting the Oklahoma City bombing. And there's a lot of research you can do about that as well. On April 19th, 1995, American anti-government extremist Timothy McVeigh, assisted by Terry Nichols, detonated a makeshift bomb stored in a rental truck parked in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, in an act of terrorism. And again, you got to take this stuff with a grain of salt because we already talked about Operation Northwoods. We know how that works. So if you want to go after the American militia movement or any of those types of groups, you're going to conduct psychological warfare and smear campaigns against them. And beyond that, you're going to conduct false flags under their name in order to give you the right to persecute those people. They made their bed, they're laying in it. That may not be true, but the fact of the matter is we know because we just went through it. We know the way that they think. So this whole Oklahoma City bombing, you got to really take that with a grain of salt. And there's lots of documentation about there over the possibility of Oklahoma City bombing being a false flag attack. There's documentaries on that as well. There was one police officer who saw some stuff, a hero, who saw some stuff on that morning of the Oklahoma City bombing, and it didn't add up to what the story was. And he was doing a little bit of investigation himself, and all of a sudden he started getting all kinds of different attacks on him, attacks against his family and threats against his family and stuff like that. He ended up self-deleting himself, supposedly. But even that is, based on the documentary, is really suspect. And there's other kinds of anomalies in that Oklahoma City bombing narrative that just don't make sense and that people talk about that they don't really like them talking about. So again, these people are very well versed in the art of manipulation of information and minds. And you really have to educate yourself in order to be aware of these types of things. So yeah, the Ruby Ridge and the Waco siege, they kind of go hand in hand. They both had to do with guns. Second Amendment being under attack. We're still dealing with that today. It's been a major issue for a good decade or more now. There's lots of YouTubers out there who are really advocating for the Second Amendment. They're doing a good job of it too. But again, false flag attacks. So I don't know if you know who Alex Jones is or not, but he was always trying to warn us about these false flag attacks, stuff like that, and these secret organizations, the government within the government, stuff like that. And he went so far as to ascribe some of these school shootings to MK Ultra type mind control to create these assassins to go in and conduct these things in order to give them the right to attack the Second Amendment. It's been going on for a long time. There's another guy, what was his name? Bill, he wrote a book called Behold a Pale Horse. And in that book, he discloses way back before any of these school shootings started taking place, that the government was actually planning on conducting these school shootings in order to give them the right to attack the Second Amendment. William Cooper, Behold a Pale Horse. You can find a lot of information in that book as well, pertaining to these things that we're discussing right now as far as the Second Amendment being under attack. They hate our freedoms. They hate us. They hate our freedoms. They hate the country. They are a secret government within a secret government working for a secret state. I don't know what the name of it is. I don't know what their goals are, other than eventually manifesting their idea for the New World Order. But in order to bring that order has to come out of chaos. And that's what they're out to create first. They have to create the chaos before they can create the order. And that's what a lot of this stuff comes down to. And they need to make examples of people and to put fear in people. Fear is your biggest enemy. And so I'm going to show the first couple minutes of this documentary here, which I suggest you to watch. I'm going to put a link in the description below. The name of this documentary is WACO, The Rules of Engagement. I'm going to go ahead and play the first couple minutes of this here.
He believes that you're fixing to hit us tonight, he says.
No, we are not fixing to hit you. That is not true. Nobody's coming in there.
Okay.
You got my word, it's solid, it's 1,000% absolute, okay?
Okay.
I know that everybody's skittish, but, you know, we just gotta work on the kids.
Yeah, wait.
Hello? No, honey, nobody's gonna come and kill you.
Are they gonna come and kill me?
No. Nobody's coming.
What is God intending to bring out of this situation? If we do our part as His servants, the government does their part as whoever they are in the plan of God. What is it that God plans to bring out of it? That's the way they thought.
We never went in. We did not introduce fire to this compound. It was not our intention that this compound be burned down. I can't tell you the shock and the horror that all of us felt when we saw those flames coming out there. It was, oh my God, they're killing themselves.
I just hope everyone doesn't jump to making decisions before they've heard our side, because right now all you're hearing is the press. You're hearing a very perverted press. Trust God, read your Bible, know what you're talking about. What are you doing with your life? What do you do every day with your life? Is it something God approves of? I mean, before you judge us, make sure your own life is clean. You know, I mean, we're being stripped naked.
We believed that this thing had to be brought to a logical conclusion at some point. We never fired one single round of ammunition.
Were there rules of engagement by the FBI? What were they?
Yes, they were, that they would not shoot unless someone's life was in danger.
The joint hearings of the Oversight Subcommittee on Crime will now come to order. The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Colville, for 5 minutes.
Thank the gentleman. In the fall of 1993, Treasury and Justice issued their respective reports about WACO. Treasury, in effect, said, well, ATF blew it, we were the bad guys. Justice, on the other hand, exonerates the FBI. Well, folks, when I got
We
those
investigated
two
ourselves and find
I
ourselves
thought,
not
this
guilty.
is all too coincidental. One group conveniently assuming blame, the other group waltzing away with no blame. I think, as I told the Attorney General, I said everybody who touched the ball at WACO fumbled it.
And there's old Slick Willie, they call him, President Clinton. He was president at the time. He was involved in the murder of them kids. His wife, Hillary, was involved in the murder of them kids. Janet Reno was involved in the murder of them kids. The leader of the FBI, Sessions was his last name, was involved in the murder of them kids. They all are guilty of the murder of those kids. And they were never brought to justice for it yet. Slick Willie's dwindling away, though. His time's getting real short. And so, yeah, more government crap trying to subdue the people, employing their full spectrum warfare, psychological, spiritual, health. And again, this goes back to what I was telling you guys earlier, you know, you don't give in to their psychological manipulation. They will enforce their will through force. And that's exactly what they did there. That's exactly what they did there. And to piggyback off this, we're going to go into some other things we're going to talk about here, including the Mena connection. You might say to yourself, well, what is that? There was a movie a while back with Tom Cruise. I can't remember the name of it. American something or other, they called it. It was basically a movie about a drug smuggler. And he was smuggling drugs for the CIA. It had to do with the Iran-Contra scandal and all that stuff that was going on, supposedly for the preservation of the Western Hemisphere from communism. But it involved supporting the Contras, which were a group of guerrilla political activists that were fighting against communism, and they supported their fight against communism by manufacturing and selling drugs. And the biggest buyer of those drugs was the CIA. Because the CIA wanted to support their operations, they would buy the drugs, and in return they would give them guns and they would give them money for the drugs. And they would bring the drugs back to the United States and put them out on the streets for the United States people. So it's like, how are you protecting the United States people from these communists somewhere in South America when you yourself, the CIA, are the actual enemies, and you're actually bringing back these destructive drugs to America and putting them into our communities? Most of the time, these drugs were funneled into poor communities, especially black communities in the inner city. And that goes back into our eugenics program where, hey, if we're going to bring these drugs in here, we might as well ship them to the people we hate the most. And the people that we think, aren't even on the same scale as being human beings. And so let's put them into the black communities. And we deal with that to this day. I don't know how much they're still involved with the drug running. But those channels that were opened up between the drug cartels and the inner city gangs, they still flow. The drugs still flow. and the black communities in the inner cities are still under a heavy burden due to our government's non-caring for them. And they promote that stuff through mind control. And they love to promote the rappers who glorify and talk about their gang and drug activity. A lot of those rappers, they're traitors. They're traitors to their, not just America, but they're traitors to their people. The people that came up out of slavery. They're traitors to the black community. That's what they are. They don't care about their fellow African Americans. They do not care about them. They'll sell them drugs and they'll murder them left and right for money and for power. They're traitors. But going on beyond that, again, going back to the Iran-Contra stuff that was going on, the buying and selling of weapons and drugs, bringing the drugs to the United States. American Hustler, was that the name of the movie? I can't remember, but it had Tom Cruise in it. If you look up his list of movies, you'll find it. It was called American something. I can't remember the last part of it. But yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit more in this this section here. The killing of Don Henry and Kevin Ives. Around 4:30 a.m. on August 23rd, 1987, the dead bodies of 16-year-old Don Henry and 17-year-old Kevin Ives were hit by a Union Pacific freight train in the town of Alexander, Arkansas, United States. At that time, in Arkansas, Slick Willie was the governor of that state. As they were lying on the tracks, the locomotive engineer engaged the brakes while blowing the horn, but the train could not stop in time and rolled over the boys. Members of the locomotive crew stated that the bodies were partially covered by a tarpaulin, what we would call in America a tarp, and were motionless. The deaths were initially ruled an accident, but further investigation and conflicting evidence led a grand jury to rule the deaths probable homicides. Popular speculation on the facts of the case has produced media coverage and allegations of wrongdoing by several government agencies. The state medical examiner, Fahmy Malak, ruled the deaths an accident, saying the boys fell asleep on the tracks as a result of marijuana intoxication. And parents did not accept this finding and conducted their own investigation. In March 1988, James Garreau of San Antonio offered a second opinion and was skeptical of the findings about marijuana. Second autopsy by Georgia medical examiner Joseph Burton found the equivalent of 1 or 2 marijuana cigarettes. A grand jury ruled the deaths a probable homicide. Now, I smoked a lot of marijuana in my day. I smoked the stuff back in the day before they had all this high-grade medical stuff going around. It was a lot less potent. And in my entire life, I have never smoked. And I've smoked cigars filled with high-grade medical stuff. They call them blunts. I've smoked those. And never once have I passed out from smoking marijuana. Very rarely. I don't know that I've ever come across anybody, and I've smoked with a lot of people. I don't know that I've ever seen anybody smoke a marijuana cigarette and pass out. The idea, I don't know if this guy, Fahmy Malak, had ever smoked the stuff. But the very idea that these two kids together smoked this stuff and then passed out on the tracks is absolutely insane. It's a lie. It's a bold-faced lie. This guy's a liar. Because it was a cover-up. That's what it was. Despite pressures from victims' families, Saline County Sheriff James H. Steed Jr. refused to investigate the case in February 1988. Dan Harmon, the parents' attorney, and Saline County prosecutor finally reached an agreement with Steed that he would begin an investigation if the parents stopped criticizing him. How could they not criticize him? They knew there was a cover-up going on, and they knew that the only people that the government was going to bring in was going to be people that were going to advance the cover-up. They had every right to criticize him and put him on the spot. He shouldn't have been worried about the parents criticizing him. He should have proved to the parents through his actions that he was going to do his job. However, the subsequent investigation was apparently sabotaged, and several witnesses who were to testify before a grand jury were found dead. Oh, what do you know? Sheriff Steed is also said to have lied about where he sent the dead boys' clothes for examination. He sent them to the Arkansas State Crime Lab and not, as intended, to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Harmon also soon lost the trust of the parents, as he is also said to have prevented the case from being solved. Mother of Kevin Ives, Linda Ives, who worked to solve and investigate the case privately until the end of her life, died in Arkansas in June 2021. She never gave up. She never gave up. And we're not going to get into suspects and theories at this point in time. Yeah, we might as well go into that because it seems like a pretty concise little paragraph here. So we're going to get into that because Barry Seal, that's the guy that Tom Cruise played in that movie. That's the guy that Tom Cruise played in that movie, Barry Seal. So here we go. We're going to go ahead and we're going to read this here. Many theories of the causes of the boys' death have been shared in popular media. The claim shared by many of these sources is that the boys were murdered after witnessing a drug drop from an airplane. This claim draws a link to the operations of Barry Seal in the Mena airport in nearby Polk County, but no direct link has been documented. The case was profiled on the television program Unsolved Mysteries in 1988. The 1994 conspiracy theory movie The Clinton Chronicles blamed the cover-up. Conspiracy theory movie. Here we go. Clinton Chronicles. So they're already trying to get you to discredit this movie by calling it a conspiracy theory movie. You don't want to answer a thing until you hear it. So they're trying to preempt your listening to this and judging it with an open mind and with critical thinking by putting this idea in your head before you even get there. And again, like I said, there's something up with Wikipedia. They got a lot of HR, human relations stuff going on, Edward Bernays type stuff going on. The movie The Clinton Chronicles blamed the cover-up of the murders on Bill Clinton, who was governor of Arkansas at the time and is alleged to have known about the drug trafficking in his state. He 100% knew about the drug trafficking in his state. In 1996, film producer Patrick Matriciana released a video entitled Obstruction of Justice, the Mena Connection, in which witnesses make allegations against various authorities. Two accused police officers denied any involvement in the case and sued Matriciana and his film company for defamation, whereupon a judge awarded them $600,000. And that's a reoccurring theme you'll find in a lot of these cases. When people are speaking out about these kind of things, and if they don't have evidence, it's kind of hard to avoid this. But again, they're experts in cover-ups. So a lot of times what happens is the people who are speaking out about this, they get prosecuted themselves. However, Matriciana successfully appealed the verdict. Good for him. And the judgment was overturned in 2001, which means that whatever he was saying about those officers, apparently he had some evidence to back that stuff up, because that's the only way he would have been able to get out of that judgment, unless somehow the court itself was found to be faulty and the trial itself was found to be faulty. And in that case, I would think that, the judge who awarded the guy $600,000 was probably involved in the same kind of group that originally perpetrated the murders of these two boys and were smuggling drugs. They do that a lot. We're going to get into some videos later on, some information later on, where that is a reoccurring theme. So they overturned the decision in 2001. In 1999, investigative journalist Mara Leverett published the book The Boys on the Tracks, Death and Denial and a Mother's Crusade to Bring Her Son's Killers to Justice, which deals with the case and the alleged involvement of the authorities in the murders. Huge cover-up. There's no doubt in my mind that these boys, supposedly what happened, and they briefly touched on this, was that the boys were out late one night. They had I think it was a .22 rifle on them, and they were out raccoon hunting. And apparently they had smoked a joint or two while they were out hunting. And they come across, they see this plane fly over and something falls out of the plane. And they go to investigate it, and they walk up on either the drugs or they walk up on the guys who were waiting for the drop and the drugs at the same time, or they got to the drugs first and then the guys who were coming to pick up the drop showed up. Either way, the guys who were there to pick up the dope, they took these boys, and because these boys were witnesses to this event, they murdered them, and then they tried to cover it up by placing them on the railroad tracks, and they were probably hoping that the train was going to so thoroughly destroy their bodies that there would be no evidence left for them to conclude anything other than some kind of horrible accident. When in fact, well, there is no well in fact. I just described to you what happened. And after that, the cover-up ensued. And that had to be covered up all the way to the top, because this whole incident, as we know, goes from the corrupt police officers to Barry Seal and the Iran-Contra stuff that was going on, and that's directly connected to the CIA, and it's just a whole big mess. It's basically the CIA. Basically, then I don't know about them now. I still wouldn't trust them these days, but basically then they were nothing short of being basically the mafia, the American sanctioned mafia, dealing dope, murdering people, killing kids, all kinds of just horrible nastiness. And these boys here paid the price. Don George Henry, 16 years old. Kevin Ives, 17 years old. And I'm going to go ahead and play the first part of that documentary that they cited in here, called Obstruction of Justice, the Mena Connection. And, well, here it is.
It was a strange place for two teenage boys to be, lying on the train tracks in the middle of the woods near Bryan, Arkansas. By the time the three men in the lead engine of the northbound Union Pacific saw the boys, it was already too late. Risking derailment, the engineer threw the mile-long train into emergency and laid down on its horn. Despite the vibration of the tracks, the screeching of metal against metal, and the deafening blast of the horn, the boys didn't move. The train's powerful headlight allowed the engineer, conductor, and brakeman to see that the boys were lying side by side across the tracks in identical positions.
I don't care how many marijuana cigarettes you smoke, that's going to wake you up.
Moments later, the train overtook the motionless boys. The victims were Don Henry, 16, and Kevin Ives, 17, both of Saline County, Arkansas. They would have started their senior year at Bryan High School the next day. Kevin had spent the night at Don's house, and the two had ventured outside a little after midnight, never to return. Little did anyone know at the time that these two friends had unwittingly stumbled upon an underworld of drug smuggling and government corruption. A cover-up of unbelievable proportions was about to begin.
Integritas.
I believe
Smoke
Kevin
screen.
and Don were near the tracks that night and saw either money or drugs dropped from an airplane. I believe that law enforcement officers killed them, and the cover-up began immediately. Expanded to the medical examiner, Fahmy Malik.
At the time, Fahmy Malik, Arkansas State Medical Examiner, was the one responsible for ruling on cause of death. His plan was to rule the boys' death a double suicide. However, after conferring with Jim Steed, Saline County Sheriff, they decided no one would accept such a ruling and changed the cause of death to accidental.
We were absolutely puzzled and outraged over the ruling of accidental as a manner of death. We didn't think that the facts supported that ruling, and what we started out to do was just to obtain a second opinion. We met resistance from all fronts, from law enforcement, from the crime lab. We retained an attorney and a private investigator and obtained court orders to get testable samples of everything that they had in order to get a second opinion. And Femi Malik refused to obey the court orders.
Without any supporting evidence, Malik ruled that the boys had each smoked more than 20 marijuana cigarettes, and in a psychedelic stupor had fallen asleep on the tracks. It was later learned that the state crime lab never even tested for the concentration of marijuana, and in fact, had used a test on the boys' blood which was designed to be used on urine. Outside experts were shocked at the absurd.
This guy's always got a smile on his
the
face.
family's nightmare battle against the state medical examiner
Something
was
irks me
made more
about that.
difficult by Governor Clinton's public support of Malik. However, after 13 long months, the parents were finally able to prove what they had believed all along.
You see Clinton sucking on his lips, let everybody know, hey guys, don't worry about me. My lips are sealed. There ain't nothing coming out of me.
Were struck by a train near Alexander. The medical examiner has said that the boys were asleep and drugged with marijuana. The parents, however, disputed that claim and persuaded authorities to reopen the case.
Because of their persistence, Kevin and Don's bodies were exhumed. New autopsies were performed, and a grand jury was convened. Dr. Joseph Burton, a nationally recognized forensic pathologist from out of state, performed the new autopsies. His findings revealed that Don Henry had been stabbed in the back, and Kevin Ives' face had been smashed by a blow from a rifle butt before their bodies were placed on the railroad tracks.
Probably his own rifle.
Alone would strongly suggest that the boys were injured.
Very first thing the cops would have done was disarm them and take their rifle from them.
Bodies being run over by the train.
Burton's autopsies also revealed that Malik had mutilated Kevin's skull by sawing it in so many different directions that it was impossible to tell where the original skull fractures were. Malik also had completely dismantled Kevin's jawbones. Burton stated he had performed thousands of autopsies and had never seen anything like it. Was Malik trying to hide something?
Yes.
Was there stabbed? The answer is no, they were not stabbed. Were they dead beforehand? Absolutely no, they were alive.
A former employee at the crime lab has said he discovered what appeared to be evidence of a stab wound during the original autopsy, but was told, quote, not to worry about it. Malik has refused all comment.
The deaths of these two boys most probably were not accidental deaths, but that they met their death as a result of injuries inflicted on them by other people or another person.
In addition to Burton, 2 other forensic pathologists and 7 forensic investigators with more than 100 years accumulated experience investigating homicides reviewed the case. It was their collective opinion that the ruling be changed to murder.
Well, there you have it. I don't got much more to say after this. I mean, got any questions? Leave them in the comments below. That's it. That's all I got to say about that. Thanks for watching if you watched the video. I hope this really set you straight on the kind of people we're dealing with here in this country.